All right. Well, hello, everyone. I am Ashley Ramey. I am the Community Outreach Specialist for the Library in Virginia. And I want to thank you for attending the library's virtual book talk, The Other Madisons, The Lost History of a President's Black Family with author Bettye Kearse and moderators Shelley Murphy and Bettye White. Before I introduce our speakers and moderators, I would like to share with you an upcoming event. On Thursday, February 25th at 6 p.m., author and historian Dr. Elizabeth Catt will be discussing her book, Pure America, Eugenics and Making of Modern Virginia, a sweeping and unsparing history of eugenics in Virginia, by extension, the United States. For more information about this event or any other events at the Library of Virginia, please check our website at www.lva.virginia.gov. Now, I would like to introduce our speakers and moderators. Bettye Kearse is a retired pediatric physician and geneticist. Her writings have appeared in Time, Mental Floss, the Boston Herald, River Teeth, and Black Lives Have Always Mattered, and was listed as the notable in the Best American Essays. And she lives in New Mexico, and you can find her online at www.betsykearse.com. Our moderators are Bettye White. She's an activist, genealogist, and retired attorney whose interest areas include African heritage, African history, culture, genealogy, as well as African American women and LGBTQ rights. A resident of Middlesex County, Virginia, she became the first Black woman on the bench in Virginia when she was appointed as substitute judge of the General District Court of the City of Richmond in 1983. White has served as the founder and officer and board member of numerous legal, women's rights, and historical fine arts and genealogical associations across the state and nation. In 2020, she was recognized by the Virginia Museum of History and Culture by inclusion in its Today's Agents of Change exhibition. Shelley Murphy, aka the Family Tree Girl, is a native of Michigan and residing in Virginia, researching her African American and European lines. She is one of the 4 coordinators and instructors at the Midwest African American Genealogy Institute and a membership chair of Daughters of the American Revolution Jack Jordan chapter. Murphy also holds a membership in OGS, NGS, and APG, and various genealogy groups. She also sits on the boards of the Library of Virginia, the Albemarle and Fluvanna Historical Societies. Murphy presents at local and national conferences, presenting problem-solving methodologies, lectures using her So What principles, and Shelley blogs in familytreegirl.com, a tagline, knowing your roots, they are long and strong. And thank you, ladies, for participating in this program, and I would like to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Ashley. I would like to start with maybe 10 to 12 minute talk about how I came to write the book, a little bit of the research, and what ultimately I hope the book will accomplish. So for more than 30 years, I was a pediatrician in inner city Boston, and I loved it. But I was haunted by the intense feeling that my life's purpose was something else. I found that purpose when I became my family's griotte, which means I became the oral historian. In 1990, my mother, the 7th generation family griotte, turned over to me the old cardboard box of family memorabilia, making me the 8th generation griotte. When I asked her, why now? She answered in her slight Texan drawl, I want to give you plenty of time to write the book. I can probably write a book, I thought, But I cannot be the one to hold up the torch of family pride and history. I knew that West African griottes are wise women who speak the stories of their ancestors and the history of their people, and that their male counterparts are called griots. Through their words, these griots and griots have preserved entire cultures for thousands of years. And I also knew that stolen and enslaved Africans have not left their tradition of oral history behind. Without it, I would not know that I am a descendant of the enslaved cook Corinne and her enslaver and half-brother, President James Madison. When I think back to the time I first heard about the president and his slave, I see myself as a 5-year-old, getting more and more fidgety while my mother made fancy dresses for me. That's when she would give me that look, throw up her hands, and say, "Always remember, you're a Madison. You come from African slaves and a president." This is my family's credo, the statement that has guided us for more than 200 years. And by repeating it on such occasions, my mother was telling me how proud she was of our ancestry, both white and Black. And she was letting me know how she expected me to behave. The reasons supported by the stories about our family that she had told me again and again. My family's credo began shortly after the end of the War of 1812. That was 6 generations before I was born. Madison's wife, Dolly, had just sold her husband's and Corinne's teenage son, my great-great-great-grandfather, Jim. Dolly had learned that one of her nieces and Jim were in love. As he was being taken away, Corinne pleaded with Jim, "Always remember, you are a Madison." She believed that the name could help them find each other someday, but they never saw each other again. Yet Jim remembered his mother's words and passed them on to his children and told them to tell their children that they are Madisons. Over the generations, as America changed, words were added, and Corinne's plea became a credo that reminded us that we aren't just descendants of a president, we are descendants of enslaved people too. But I didn't know why the credo should make me proud. For me, it resounded with the abuses of slavery. So I decided that to become the kind of griot I hoped I could be, I would confront the discomforting parts of my family's story. Now, you just heard about Corinne, the enslaved woman who had the relationship with James Madison and who started the credo. But the story actually begins with Corinne's mother, a stolen woman called Mandy. Mandy was my family's first African ancestor in America and our first griot. Knowing her deeply, I believed, would help me to become an unflinching griot who understood and had reconciled all that the credo was saying. So in 1992, I began my journey of discovery. of my ancestors, our country, and myself. I traveled to Lagos, Portugal, where the transatlantic slave trade began, to Ghana, West Africa, where Mandy was born, to Baltimore, Maryland, where a replica of a slave ship, like the one that carried Mandy away from home, sits in a museum, to Central Texas, where my great-great-grandparents and their 8 sons learned they were free, to New York City, where an 18th century African burial ground had recently been discovered, and many, many times to Montpelier, James Madison's former plantation in Virginia, where Mandy labored and died. On these journeys, I learned that wherever African slaves once walked, history had buried their footsteps. Under a gaudy concession stand in Portugal, in the sand between slave castles and the Atlantic Ocean along the west coast of Africa, at the bottom of that ocean as slave ships sailed along, beneath a federal building in Lower Manhattan, among the ashes of burned documents and personal papers in courthouses and in private homes, and under a brick walkway and in unmarked graves at Montpelier. But I also learned that enslaved people were remarkable individuals who possessed a sense of hope and a strong sense of their own humanity, by which they survived, and many talents by which they contributed mightily to America. And when enslaved peoples died, these qualities did not die with them, but were passed down to their descendants, including those of us alive today. So I hope that how I try to live my life will help keep memory of my ancestors alive. Our ancestors are alive in the stories told from generation to generation. They're alive in the letters, documents, photographs kept in Bibles and old cardboard boxes. They're alive in everything we do with what we inherited from the men and women who came before us. We are the evidence of what happened to the stolen Africans who had survived. Our ancestors, the list of who we are and how we represent these astounding people is long, and the possibilities are infinite because we all have strengths and talents gifted to us from our ancestors held in bondage, and we all have family stories that inspire. My enslaved ancestors helped me to become the griotte I wanted to be, one who tells the whole story. I believe that through the book I have written, I found a way to keep the memory of my ancestors alive and to make the world pay attention to them, and to pay attention to the other enslaved ancestors who helped build this country. And my ancestors also helped me figure out what my life's purpose was. Serving as a pediatrician was rewarding, but all too often, my Black patients revealed to me that racism had convinced them that they didn't have any talents, and especially among teenage boys, that they weren't destined for anything except jail or an early grave through violence. Their lack of hope was heartbreaking. But I am convinced that embracing our slave ancestry can help our young people to gain, they have much to gain and much to give. So if we were to encourage them to grab onto and nurture their own talents and their own humanity, they could believe in themselves and defy the looming specter of jail and early graves. Like their enslaved ancestors, our young people could make contributions to America and they could have hope. Thank you.
That's beautiful, Bettye. Just beautiful. One of the first questions that typically comes up is, what did Montpelier, the home of James Madison, how did they react to your book coming out?
Well, I first went to Montpelier in 1992, and I continue to go back as often as I can. And they have always been supportive of me and my research and the book. And we were going to have a book launch party at Montpelier, but COVID came out.
Right.
And it had to be canceled. But they've been nothing but supportive and helpful.
Yeah, I'm going to turn this next question over to Bettye, because it falls in line with when you came up with Mandy's name.
So Bettye, congratulations, first of all. This is such a monumental work that you brought forth. And so I know that Mandy and all the generations are mighty proud of what you have accomplished. But I wonder, as you talk about being the 8th generation griot in your family, and that your mother told the stories, you say John Chester, your grandfather told the stories. Did you know that John Chester, your grandfather, was the 6th generation griot or griot when he was telling you those stories? Or is that something that you learned after you assumed the role?
Well, in terms of the word griot, I'm probably the first to use that term. Mm-hmm. They were just stories that were passed down. And as I did my research, I came across this word, and I read a wonderful book by Thomas Hale. It's called Griots and Griottes. And it gives a long, long history of this tradition. And I realized that that's what my family had been doing for 8 generations, that they had followed this African tradition.
Fascinating. In the book, Mandy, your first ancestor of yours who was stolen from West Africa, you speak in her voice. I was just fascinated by that. I waited for the Mandy part to come because that was so intense. Did Mandy always speak to you personally, or did she not speak to Bettye until Bettye became the griot?
Okay, well, those are my favorite parts too. Mandy started speaking to me after I became the griot and as I was writing the book. And the way it started, I was on the beach in Massachusetts, and it's on the East Coast. I'm looking westward, and I think, man, this is the Atlantic Ocean. And I thought, this is the way Mandy had come. And I was thinking about her, and I began not really hearing voices, but just sort of knowing and sensing the story that she wanted to tell me about her capture. And then, it just sort of went from there. From there, I was really thinking deeply about her and what she may have experienced. Then I would know what she wanted me to know and what she wanted me to share through writing.
As a griot, so you have taken the oral tradition, and I guess even your grandfather started this. There were documents, there was a Bible that was misplaced, and then your mother gave you the precious box that had all of those things in it. So, and then she did research. I was amazed that your mother spent so much time in Salt Lake City at the family history library doing that research so many years ago. So she was becoming archivist in addition to griot. And so as you blended those, it's easy to see how the two might have a synergistic effect one on the other, so that blending them takes you to another place. But I'm wondering if you find that anything is lost by this hybrid transition to the griot being archivist as well as griot.
I don't think so. My great grandfather actually started saving items in the Bible. So when he was freed and he bought land, he had his land deed, and then he sold that and bought more land, kept that land deed, and he had some birth certificates. And anyway, so my grandfather kind of started the tradition of saving items, creating an archive and passed them on to my grandfather, which, he unfortunately lost. But I think that having something tangible, just makes the stories more real. And I think also can help draw in young people. So I encourage people to go, dig into, actually send the kids into the attic and the basement and the back of the closet to see what letters or, any kind of memorabilia can be found there. And there's got to be a story behind each item. And so then ask the elders, about those items, and, just add, I think the items help add to the stories.
I think that's a great follow-up to this next one, because those of us that do family research, can you explain how you would have filled the gaps where you didn't have a written record or something to follow up with about your family, or something that doesn't exist anymore or that didn't survive?
That's a really good question. I mean, the bits and pieces are so hard to come by and so scattered. One kind of has to figure out what happened, where, you have to kind of figure out how to fill in the gaps, what makes sense. How do we get from one point to the other? And, and that may require some, research to get a sense of the time and place, and, like how people lived. But you're able to some significant extent, I think, to recreate the lives of your ancestors when you don't really have the actual documents.
Mm-hmm.
So and that makes me think about the fact your mother and your grandfather had the sense that your first generation African ancestor in this country, Mandy, came from Ghana, present day Ghana. I'm wondering if you have been able to confirm that through any of your research.
No, but my brother and I are working on that. He has come across a group of Nigerian people who were nomadic, and many of them were in Ghana, because it seems that many of the Africans who ended up in Virginia were actually from Nigeria. And so we're trying to sort of figure out how the family history fits in with the story or our family story fits in with Virginia's Africans being mostly Nigerian. And I cannot remember the name of these nomadic people, unfortunately, right now. But my brother and I are working on it.
That's awesome. So from your perspective, how do you think conducting the genealogical research has impacted your life?
Well, that the genealogical research, writing the book, and now promoting the book just took over my life. I mean, that,
And we're so happy.
especially after I retired from
We're
PBS.
so happy you have.
Yes.
Yeah, because that's the inspiration for a lot of people to be able to read this book and follow your path and the trail. You're going through the records, you're telling the stories and things like that. So, Bettye, I'll
Yeah.
let you take the next question there.
Well, I'm just been so amazed at all of this, Bettye, as to how you took the oral history and you blended it in and then you expanded upon it. So even as you're looking at your white family, did the John Madison part, John Madison, the immigrant, is that something that was in your oral history, or did you determine which Madison first came from Europe in your research?
No, my mother did that research.
She did it. Okay.
Yeah, she did that research. And then I've kind of added on to it and confirmed it through my relationship with the historians at Montpelier. But my mother started it. I'm just sort of boosting it.
Sure. Well, you mentioned in the book that at a point you were pursuing kind of the Monticello model, I'll call it, in that you were looking to see whether whether your Madison line was the same Y chromosome as the white Madison line, and you said that that didn't work. Do you still have a male to male person in your line and in the other line that you might try? Is that still a possibility?
Well, I have the male line in my line, and the Y chromosome line in my family that's pretty pure. And Shelley referred me to a genetic genealogist whose name is Shannon Christmas.
Yeah, sure.
And he has been helping me with the Y chromosome line. And 3 of my male cousins have sent in their DNA to family tree.
Family tree
And we've
DNA.
only gotten the results back from 1, but we're really hoping that all 3 match. So that part's important. And I'm looking for, this is going to maybe take this conversation off into a rabbit hole, but and maybe I can make it short. But there's another Black family who descends from a man whose name was Shadrach Madison, who could have been Jim, the Jim that I referenced in my family, who was my great, great, great grandfather. So we're trying to get Y chromosomes from that family and trying to trace Shadrach, find out who Shadrach Madison's father was. As far as the recognized Madisons, we haven't gotten there yet, but there is, according to Shannon Christmas, a pool. And so we're thinking that maybe someone in that pool will match my cousin's DNA.
Sure. I was going to ask you whether there was a President Madison Y project, so
Right.
apparently not. Because the next question then that I had as soon as I read the book is, have you and your family done autosomal DNA to look at the whole genome? And if so, have you matched the Madisons? Have you matched other folk in Central Virginia, Black or white?
I'm still working on that too. About 3 or 4 years ago, I did an autosomal comparison with a woman who is a descendant of one of Madison's sisters. Now, we did not match, but I'm told that at best, there's a 16% chance that we would have. So we still have to go farther with the Y chromosome, with the autosomal chromosome. But we're really banking on the Y.
Yeah. Oh, don't knock the autosomal.
Don't knock it.
Yeah.
I'm going to take a little twist away a little bit from the DNA for a second. We know the system of slavery. There's going to be some traumatic and emotional type moments during your research. How did you deal with that? And well, did you come across some of that also? Because you share some things, in the book. But how did you handle that? Those parts of your history um, throughout this system of slavery.
Well, as I did my research and wrote the book, some of it was very, very difficult, very painful, especially when I went to Ghana
Mm,
and, I was in Elmina Castle, which might have been where Mandy was held. At one point, there were a number of castles up and down the coast of West Africa where enslaved Africans were held until they were put onto slave ships and sent to the New World. But Elmina still exists among a few others. And when I went there, one of the stories was about that we learned from the guide was that when the governor of Elmina, who was from the Netherlands, wanted a woman, he would have a bunch of them brought out of the female dungeons and put into the courtyard below the balcony of his rooms. And he would point to the one he wanted, and then she would be dunked into a cistern of water nearby until she was clean enough for the governor to touch. And then she was sort of shoved up through up a ladder and through a trap door that led directly into the governor's bedroom where she was raped. Well, I'm standing there and I just couldn't help but imagine myself as one of those women. Just the pain, the vulnerability, the sense of loss, the horror, the fear, just sort of came on me. But I got through it because I guess I think because I knew Mandy had gotten through something similar. And, I do know that I inherited her strength. And then another thing that helped me was one of the things Mandy used to say. She passed down that being fighting mad can help you get through some things.
Mhm.
So then you saw this somewhat of a healing mechanism to writing this book in some aspects
Yes.
of it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, so it helps to get it on paper. It doesn't take away the
Right.
anger, but it does kind of contain it and it gives it some purpose.
Mhm. Yeah. Your discussion brings me to a question that Shelley raised earlier, and that is, what kind of reaction did you get from your family as you were doing all this work and exposing your family story to the world?
My Black family?
Yeah.
Well, and then after that, the white family.
Start with the Black family.
Start with the black family.
Yeah. Well, most of my family are very pleased that I'm doing this. And, many of them have read the book and they like it and they are learning so much that they didn't know before. There are a few who are still holding out for that DNA proof and, just proof. But most of them, they're just happy to know that the stories that they heard are being shared and that they're important and that they're becoming part of the recognized story of of America.
That takes me back, Bettye, to you mentioned that Mandy, your first generation African ancestor in this country, had the one child with the one Madison child. And then her daughter, Corinne, had the one Madison child. So I immediately wondered whether you know or have been able to determine whether either of them had other Madison children or other children at all. Might there be relatives of yours in Orange County and all around the area? So I guess it would be your paper trail. Have you found it?
I don't know of any other descendants of Mandy and Corinne. There may be. There very well could be. I would almost expect there to be, but I don't know them and I don't know of them. I do know that there are other African American families from the Virginia area who have the same oral history, that they descend from either the Madisons or one of his brothers, or even, even from the father.
So what kind of recommendations would you give someone wanting to write a book about their family history? I mean, that you're talking years of research here, started with your mother, passing this down. What kind of recommendations or suggestions would you share with folks?
Well, to do it, write the book, because it does help save those stories and helps preserve them to be passed on from generation to generation. Now, the writing process, though, depends on whether or not you want to publish the book. If you want to publish the book, it's very important to get down those writing skills, because that's the only way you're going to get a publisher, an agent and a publisher. But even if you don't, I mean, it's still just important to have the stories written and shared within your own family.
Yeah, I was amazed by your study as a writer. I mean, by the writing classes, the years of writing classes. In fact, how many years was that you were with writers' workshops and all those?
Oh my goodness. I don't know, too many. Close to 30, maybe not 30. I mean, it really took 30 years from start to finish to write the book.
Wow.
But there were a lot of reasons for that. One was that I had to learn how to write. That is one reason. Another reason was that when my mother asked me to write the book, she meant for me just to write down the family stories.
Yeah.
Just record them. But when I was writing, I realized there was much more to these stories than what just happened to my own family. That these similar experiences had happened millions of times to other families, and that if I made it into a work of fiction, okay, so I wrote a whole book that was just the family stories. But then I thought, if I made it into a work of fiction, then my ancestors could speak on behalf of other people's ancestors who had similar histories. So I wrote a whole book of fiction. But I was in one of my heavy duty writing classes at Radcliffe seminars. It was very rigorous class. And they simply didn't like my fiction. But I had written a prologue that was about how I came to hear the stories and how my mother had come to hear the stories. And so it was a little bit of a mini memoir. And they liked it. They're like, okay, so write the whole book that way. So reluctantly, I did that. So that's another reason it took so long. And of course, then the slow research added to that. And then another thing that made it take 30 years is that I had such rich material. I didn't really know what to do with it. And I came to understand that I had to grow as a person to really understand what I had. So anyway.
Well, we've got some audience questions, unless you have another one, Bettye. I'm gonna,
I actually do have one,
right.
two I want to ask is, so can we expect the novel from this material?
No, you're not going to get a novel.
I wasn't going there.
Of course, the
But
other
you know
thing,
what I would like to do? I would like to write a young adult book.
Mhm.
So I've often asked, who is the audience for this book?
Right.
And I have kind of an odd answer, and that is that the audience is primarily African American women,
Hmm.
but that the book isn't really for them. It's really for their children. So if I am able to get this young adult book written, then those children can read for themselves and think for themselves and figure stuff out for themselves.
Right.
And I also would like to write a children's picture book.
That was one of the questions from the audience, was any chance of you writing a children's book on being an ancestor of the Madisons? If so, this book could be required reading in Virginia school system for 5th and 6th graders. So you kind of answered that one,
so
which
the
I
other
think would be
thing, though,
exciting.
is, are you done with this? No, because you're not done. You're going to write the children's book. But
Right.
when is it that you pass the mantle to your daughter? Is that something that's done in one fell swoop, or does she get an apprenticeship period, or what's that process, or how do you see that happening when she becomes the 9th griotte in your family?
Well, I have been telling her the family stories for many years. Um, but I don't know when I'm going to turn the mantle over to her. For one thing, she lives in London, so
Mm.
it's a bit difficult because well, I will want her to, and she will probably want to continue the research.
Right.
Mhm.
And it's hard enough doing it here. It's even harder to do it from London. I mean, the internet is helpful, but you've got to go to those courthouses. And,
Yes.
you have to go to places. And so I don't know. I'll hang on there. Hang on.
So you're not about to go to see her. It's about to call Nicole and say, "I'm coming to bring you the box." It's
Yeah.
not going to happen.
Yeah.
Well, that can be a scary thing because
Yeah.
when my mother received well, she didn't really receive a box. When my mother took over as the griotte from my grandfather, who was the griot, keep repeating those terms. He did so at that time because he was very ill.
Mhm.
And so, when my mother brought the box to me, at first I was really scared to death because I thought, I mean, she was ill. But
Mhm.
I didn't ask her if she was ill. I just asked her why now, and she said, "Oh, I just wanted to give you plenty of time to write the box to write the book." And so on my end, it's kind of hard. I mean, I need to prepare myself and I need to prepare Nicole without scaring either one of us.
Yes, that could be scary.
Yeah. So, what are some of the other, and this is coming from one of the audience, what are some of the other surnames that are associated with the African ancestry of President Madison? Do you have other connected, surnames to the family?
Well, this is not exactly the answer to that person's question, but it's a good story. So I have to tell it.
Okay.
So there is a segment of my African American family who are millers.
Mhm.
And the reason that they are millers is because one of my grandfather's brother was involved in kind of a scuffle with a group of white men. He and a group of friends were involved in the scuffle. And one of the white men was killed. And so my uncle was afraid he would be lynched. So he left town and moved, I don't know, 200-300 miles away and changed his name and never came back because he was afraid that they would be waiting for him and lynch him. So we have the Millers. And then there, of course, there's families that have married in.
So has Mount Pelier, and again, this is another question, has Mount Pelier incorporated any of your research into any of the stories or the tours and exhibits? And if not, would you want them to do that?
Well, they have.
Okay.
So there's an exhibit called A Mere Distinction of Color, which is a wonderful exhibit that focuses on the role that enslaved people played at Montpelier in Madison's life, in Virginia, in the country, in the development of the Constitution. And I am part of that exhibit. So my image and my voice and my story are in that exhibit. And they also, a part of that exhibit has a wall that has the names of the enslaved people there written, sort of like a band of names that goes around one of the rooms. And Corinne's name has been added to that wall.
So is there a group of those like you who exist and share histories with others? Maybe I think it's from the point of maybe a descendants group. And I know, Mount Pelier has a descendants group. Are you and your family involved? And are there any of your family still in the area of Mount Pelier?
None of my family is still in the area of Montpelier because when Jim was sold, he ended up in Tennessee.
Okay.
And from Tennessee, they went to Texas. And so many of my family is still in Texas. Now, I am a member of the Montpelier slave descendants. The Montpelier Descendants Committee.
Yeah.
I am a member of that, yes.
So are you connected to the Gilmores at Montpelier that we
I
just
do
heard
know
so much
the
about
Gilmores. I know them.
Gloria.
I do know them. I know Rebecca, yes.
Okay.
So another
They have
question.
that wonderful cabin.
Yes, it's a wonderful site to visit. Another question says, do you run across intersections between the enslaved communities at Monticello and Mount Pelier? And the person says, I'm thinking of the frequent visits Madison made to Monticello and of the growing Black communities in the DC area from Orange County and also Albemarle County.
I do know descendants of Thomas Jefferson and Sally Hemings, but I don't know other descendants throughout Virginia and in DC.
And I'm going to say a side note regarding your book. It's also available on audiobooks if people didn't know that. And it is a whole different, I guess I get a different feeling when I'm hearing somebody read the words versus me reading the words. And so, because I do both, a lot of times I got the book and I follow up with the audio. And so one of the questions was, how would you recommend that people keep track of their stories? Did you do everything online? Did you keep a log, or did you do a journal, or did you record throughout your research strategies and methods that you were using?
Oh my, a little bit of everything. I would copy documents and just add them to the box. I would do research on the internet and print it, put those in the box. Most of them I ended up in the box. Did a little bit of journaling, especially during the travels. Didn't do much recording. Very, very, very little recording. I tried recording during some of my travels, but especially I remember trying in Ghana, it didn't work out very well. It's hard this was in the days of batteries, and it was hard to keep up, the
Well,
battery.
and I might speak on behalf of your daughter and say, well, some recordings just might help right now as you're about to, when you transition this over to me. I'd like to have some recordings. And again, you never know, because I tend to write some of my stories. So one person is asking, saying, for 4 generations, my white ancestors enslaved African descent people in Culpeper. From many years of deep research, I have found many cousins of color who now share in this journey of discovery. Dr. Kearse, what lessons can we take from research into families connected through slavery to work towards reconciliation, making amends, and providing reparations?
Well, I'm glad that white members of families and Black members of families are coming together and talking and sharing their stories and sharing their histories and recognizing their relationships and honoring those relationships. That's the beginning, and it's kind of a
Sure.
model for the whole country, really.
I was thinking, Bettye, Orange County just has so much going on, so much of our history. We talk about those Virginia-born presidents. I'm wondering if you found any connections to Zachary Taylor's family in Orange County.
I don't know. There is a relationship. We do have a relationship with Zachary Taylor's family. And I'm trying to remember if Frances Taylor, who was Ambrose Madison's wife, was related to Zachary Taylor. And I just can't remember right now.
Well,
I'll look that up.
You mentioned Ambrose. I think we just have to share with the audience that
Yes.
Bettye and I might be related. We've been playing with this for the past few days, and we get back to Gloucester County, Virginia, and the Todd family. And if in fact we make that confirmation, we'll be 9th cousins. We share the same great grandparents, however many, Thomas Todd and Ann Gorsick. So film at 11. We'll let you know whether we find.
I'm waiting for this because I'm counting on this. Because I think the connections that we find, and there's also that belief that you encounter people for reasons, and it could be the connection that you two might find. So another question from the audience is, why is the Madison ancestors connection less well known than the Hemmings Jefferson connection?
Well, part of it is because Jefferson is so revered in Virginia. There's just a lot more records, a lot more interest in him, which I don't really understand. He didn't contribute more than Madison did to the country. But I don't know if it was their personalities or their height. But
yeah,
Jefferson there's just been more attention, paid to him. And there is more, there are more stories about Sally Hemings and her travels to Paris and when she was with Jefferson and when her children were born that sort of corroborate the stories that were passed down orally. And I don't have the detailed stories about, who was where and who was with them that to help with that.
Right.
I
No.
thought that was interesting, Betty, that TJ, as we might refer to him, got so much flack, and Sally Hemings wasn't even his sister. And here
Right.
we have,
Right.
James Madison having a child with his own sister, and he
Yeah.
manages to escape the bad publicity. So I just found that to be interesting.
That's
Yes, it
very
is.
interesting.
So, in looking in the Madison papers, did you find Mandy's name in any of the papers?
No, I did
Okay.
not. No,
Which is
nor did
not
my mother.
unusual. I will say
No,
that.
my mother and I went through all these microfiche and
Yeah.
what was left. But, when James and Dolly died, each of them had their personal papers burned.
Mm,
Really?
wow.
Yes, yes,
Wow.
each of them did. So James had Dolly burn his, and Dolly had one of her nieces burn hers. So who knows what was in there? Plus, Dolly had this son who sold off papers
That's
Mhm.
right.
to help pay his gambling debts.
That's right.
Mhm.
That's right. So another thought here is, have you considered a collaborative tour with other African American biographers or genealogists with known ties to slave owners, even if it's done virtually?
A tour. Oh,
I know.
no, that sounds like a great idea.
It does sound
Would love
good.
Yeah.
to.
Would you focus in Orange County pretty much, or the area, the whole area, or just because I know there's an African American genealogy group in Orange County, and so there could even be more connections that we don't even know about, So
But they're
Well, I
all
would start in Orange, but
yeah.
there's so many descendants. Like I know descendants of James Monroe
Mm-hmm.
as well as George Washington, and of course Thomas Jefferson. So we might want to cover a bit more of Virginia.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. There weren't very many people in colonial Virginia, so they tend to be connected. And I was just, as I was looking at the Madison material, I was seeing King George County, I was seeing Caroline County, I was seeing
Mhm.
Culpeper, Orange. So it's certainly all intersected.
Were you able to visit the birthplace of Madison in Port Conway, King George, Virginia?
No, I haven't. I have not done that yet. What a great
That's
idea.
part of the tour. That's a great
That's
question.
part of the
Yeah.
tour.
I do it virtually now and then plan to get to King George as soon as pandemic restrictions will
Yeah.
allow you to get there.
Yes. So, can you tell us a little bit more about the Radcliffe Seminar, and would you recommend this class for aspiring writers? I think that's a good segue here.
Yeah, the Radcliffe Seminar, they have a lot of courses. I don't know if they still have that particular one. The one that I was in was called Writing for Publication. But is this person in the Boston area?
They didn't identify themselves.
If they are in the Boston area, there is a writing consortium a writing center called Grub Street, and it's fabulous. It has all kinds of writing courses, very high level, different levels, from beginners to people who are trying to just polish off, their future Pulitzer Prize winning book, Grub Street.
So I have a, a question to ask, and it's a typical one. But what did you find? I want to say most shocking, or the most fearful thing, or what surprised you most on this journey of the research?
I think there were a number of things. One of them was the Constitution itself
Mm,
and the term other persons. I found just very odd that, okay, so other marginalizes enslaved people,
mm-hmm,
but then they're called persons.
Mhm.
So they're recognized as human beings, but they're treated like property. So there's a real struggle there with the writers of the Constitution as to what to call these human beings that they treated as property and marginalized. And, that's sort of in the same line as some of the hypocrisy that slave owners like Jefferson and Madison had in saying that, slavery was wrong. So Madison said it's a sad blot on our country, and yet he owned hundreds of people over time and never freed a single one. So just kind of this blatant hypocrisy, surprised me. But I could go on. There's a lot of things.
When you mentioned that other persons, I never really thought about what that meant and how unusual that language is, for just all
Yes,
the reasons that you've said. And so it sounds like other persons is a subject of a whole next talk.
it is.
well, and thinking of this when you're talking about other persons and talking about enslaved individuals, um, are there other enslaved individuals on, say, on the plantation or the Madison property that had significant skills that they were doing? What you mentioned, Mandy, what she was doing, Corrine. What about coming down the line a little more? What else was happening? And I'm going to call it the community, because it's a community, and it's basically, in my mind, it's a black space, because there's more African Americans enslaved on the property than they would have been the white Madisons. So what were some of the things that they were doing, besides possibly identified maybe as a cook or something like that? Can you recall any of the other, I'm going to say, occupations or
Well,
jobs?
one of them that comes readily to mind is a blacksmith. I believe his name was Moses.
Oh, okay. And that's a trait
But,
that,
anything that was done there
yeah,
was done by enslaved people.
right.
But, they even made Madison Senior's famous peach brandy. They
Really?
did they did everything. They built the mansion. Besides just cooking the food and
Right.
uh, you know, working the fields,
Hmm.
they did everything.
Yeah. Yeah.
So when you say that, Betty, I think about you're talking about Mandy and Corrine and their cooking and baking skills. And so what immediately comes to my mind is, did any of those recipes
Yes.
manage to come down through the oral history, and do you have them?
No, I
Oh.
don't.
Oh.
I don't.
Okay.
No, it's really sad, especially since Corrine was known for her apple pie.
Ah,
Mm.
And it would have been nice if her recipe, she probably didn't have a recipe though. They didn't have recipes. It was a little bit of this and a little
a
bit of
little
that,
bit
and
of
you
that.
wait just for that long, and
Yeah.
Then what you do, not having the recipe, then you look to see what kinds of apples would have been grown in Orange County during her time, and which cooking methodologies would have been available to her. And you create this recipe in her memory that
Sure.
brings to mind what she would have cooked.
That's a wonderful idea. And I'm not much of a cook, but I will do that. I will do that.
So
And
there's
you know,
a,
you're talking,
go ahead.
you were talking about the cooks and their recipes, and that made me want to let everybody know that there is a 37-minute documentary film, The Other Madisons, based on my book. And one of the things that is discussed in this documentary film is about the power that enslaved cooks could have, because they had the opportunity of poisoning their masters.
Absolutely.
Mhm. Mhm.
And you just wonder, I won't take it any further. So, what kind of system do you have that you archive your research and information? So, we might have people that are brand new to research, brand new to slave era research. How do you preserve your information and your files and things? That's an audience question, also.
Oh, okay. They're kind of by person's name.
Okay,
But if I come across something that's about Ambrose, I'll throw it into the Ambrose folder,
got it.
or into it could be further down the line. One of my other ancestors, they each have a folder, and it's not all that well organized, but I know where to go to, to
Yeah,
put things
yeah.
and
So another
retrieve
question, Betty, that
information.
comes to mind is you've spent what you said the better portion of 30 years on the Madisons. Have you researched your other lines? And if not, is that on the agenda?
You mean on my father's side?
Well, other lines on your mother's side, even, and on your father's side.
No, I haven't. On my father's side, my brother has taken on that task, and he has done an amazing job,
Mhm.
just absolutely amazing. That's the Wilsons. But on my side, no, I focused on the Madisons, and that's really been plenty.
Mhm.
Or
And
branches of the Madisons, people who have married in,
mhm.
but yeah, mostly centered on the Madisons.
Mhm.
Did any of the descendants, say from Mandy Corrine, did any of them take the Madison surname? That's another question from the audience. Did any of them? Because it's really not common for enslaved individuals. It's kind of a myth that's out there that they automatically took the slave owner's name. So, do you know of any in your lines that did that?
That took the Madison
Surname.
name?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
We are there. I have many relatives whose surname is Madison. My mother's maiden name was Madison.
Oh,
Her
okay.
father was Madison. Her grandfather, her great grandfather was Madison, and her great great grandfather was Madison. Now he is interesting because he was owned by the Billingsleys at the time of emancipation. The Billingsleys are a famous Texas family who had some roots in North Carolina and some in Tennessee, Jim was sent to Tennessee, and from Tennessee sent to Texas. And the Billingsleys originally owned my great great grandfather in Tennessee, but brought him and his family to Texas. So when my family was emancipated in Texas, they did not take the Billingsley name. They took the name Madison.
Mhm.
And we believe that they took the name Madison to honor the family credo and Corrine's plea to Jim to always remember he's a Madison.
That is
That's interesting.
that your
Go ahead,
family,
Bettye.
yeah, no, it's so powerful that your family held on to, despite Jim being sold to Tennessee and then Texas, that they held on to that credo, remember you're a Madison. And I can see that so they absolutely kept that name.
So has there been an audience question? Has there been any criticism that you've met during this research or even publishing the book? And how have you responded to them if you've received any?
Any criticism
About the story
about,
or anything?
well, I mean, I wish the question were a bit more specific.
Yeah, that's it.
Um,
I'm sorry.
yeah, but let me kind of guess or assume what the person is asking. You know, are they, let me guess that they're asking if the acknowledged Madison descendants
That's one.
have
I think that's where they're at.
to my family history. And some of them have and some of them have not. So some of them I've met two women who were descendants of Madison sisters, and both of them embraced me as a cousin and are proud to have me as a cousin, and I'm proud to have them as cousins. But there are some people some members of the National Society of Madison Family Descendants who are not supportive and not happy with me and my book.
Okay.
You know, that reminds me that you said that you had one of the Madison males, the white Madison males, lined up to do Y chromosome, and then after some publicity, that person pulled out. Would you talk about that a little bit? What happened?
Well, he was identified as someone who had impeccable genealogy, which is important. And I was working at that time with a genetic genealogist whose name was Bruce Jackson, but he passed away a few years ago.
Remember?
And so Jackson always stressed that when we do comparative DNA, that on the person on the white Madison side has to have impeccable genealogy. So the National Association of National Society of Madison Family Descendants identified this one man who had the appropriate genealogy and who was willing to do a comparative study with a Y chromosome study with my family. But just then, shortly after that, there was a huge article in the Washington Post about my research. And this wasn't too long after the Jefferson article came out in 1998 that just created such an uproar. And you know, this man, and I never learned his name, but this man just didn't want to get involved, you know, in that kind of upheaval. So he withdrew. And other people have come forth and offered, you know, other men, but I haven't been able to find someone to help me really confirm their genealogy.
Yeah. So we're winding down here a bit. So there's a couple questions regarding the research. One was, did you basically use the census and then they help you? And also, did church records come into play along your research path here?
Oh, anything and everything, you know, that you can find. Yes, some. I did not actually find too much in church records. What was the other source they named?
Census.
Census records.
Census, yes. Use the census quite a bit. And in fact, one of the documents that's in the box is the 1860 census that lists my great great grandparents. And then at that point, they had 10 children. And they're listed under the name of Jesse Billingsley. And another census that will take me back down the rabbit hole I mentioned earlier was the 1830 census, which identified a free Black man whose name was Shadrach Madison. So, and as I mentioned, he's just a one that opens up a lot of possibilities in terms of finding Jim.
So that brings me to just one final question, Bettye, is as you were developing, so you had Jim, who was your ancestor, who was actually the son of President Madison and your ancestor Corrine. And then at a point, I seem to remember that there were a lot of sons there. I don't know whether you said someone had 8 or 9 children. So I'm wondering that if that family had always kept up with each other, or through your research that you may have found collaterals and then informed them that, no, you are descended from President Madison. I'm wondering if you found were able to inform some of your relatives.
Well, remember I mentioned there were eight okay, so my great grandparents had 8 sons.
Mm-hmm.
And when my family does family reunions, the descendants of those 8 sons get together.
Okay.
So it's roughly every 3 years. We were supposed to do it last year, but COVID made us cancel it. And then at those reunions, well, years ago, my mother used to give the family history to them and actually spurred many of them to continue the genealogical research. And then I picked up, and now I give the family history, as more and more younger people come, attend the reunions. So, some of them already knew they were descendants of President Madison, but some of them didn't. So they're very interested, in that history.
Wonderful.
So there's an interesting question here, and especially for folks that are thinking about writing on their family history. Does the book document all the stories passed down from your family, or did you hold back any stories, to keep for the family only? I think that's
Oh,
interesting.
Great question.
I held, they're not all in there. No,
Okay.
no,
So
yeah.
as a writer, how'd you make that decision what goes and what doesn't?
Well, the book is really about my becoming the griotte.
Okay.
And so I kind of just chose the stories that I like the most,
Okay. Great. Which is interesting because those are the ones that you're going to hand down as many as you can to get that information passed down. But of course, it's almost like, were those the favorites in the book, or are there still some more hidden favorites that are also not in the book? I'll say it that way, favorites, because there's stories. The This is really also about survival too on your ancestors, and the brilliance of that. And of course, we're all thankful for who that came before us and made a path for us. So are there, and I know you said you didn't put them all in there, but is there anything else you would like to share that's not in the book? That could be in the future book, or something that would help inspire a writer to commit to doing a similar thing on their family, something passionate or something that you felt was really worth it. I'm trying to get encouragement to do mine. So help me,
Yeah.
Betty.
Well, there are a lot of stories, and I think I will publish them, but I mean, I think I may take one and use it as the basis for the
Okay.
children's picture book, which really has to be focused probably on just one story. Or I may take a few for the young adult book that, sort of, choose like a theme. Like, let's say the theme is the strength of the women.
Yeah.
Then those stories that have to do with that, I would use there.
Okay. And it makes sense. And so another question that comes to mind, during this research, did any of the children get sold off?
Besides Jim,
Yeah. I mean, was
well,
there, are there other lines that could be in other places? Because I know Madison sold those 16 folks, and they end up in Louisiana type thing. And I'm just wondering if there was more, besides Jim that was sold, that is that direct, connection to yours, to Jim.
I believe that some of Elizabeth and Emmanuel's children were sold.
Okay.
Because they had somewhere around 15 or 16 children, but only 8 of them were, well, let me take it back. There were 10 of them described on the 1860s. And then later documents, there's only 8 that are described. So there were some girls that are mentioned. One was named Manda, possibly after Mandy.
Yeah.
And so she appears in an 1848 document. It's not on the 1860 census. And there are 2 younger children that are 1860 census that are never seen again. So they could have died, but my guess is they were sold.
Well, then that's another plug for autosomal DNA, because you started recent enough that you're likely to get some autosomal matches there. So you and Shannon Christmas are going to have a good time.
He's great, by the way. He's great.
Thank you. He's working on a line for me as well. Yes. Yeah. One of
Well,
those
we have him
elusive
busy.
ants. Huh?
We have him busy.
Yes, we do.
Yes.
We do. So we're here at the end here, and Besida, if you have any other questions, if not, I'm going to turn it back over to Ashley.
I don't have questions, but Betty, thank you so much, cousin Betty. We
Yes,
It's
yes,
nice to meet a cousin and see Shelley again. I've met Shelley before,
yes, yes,
virtually. Yes, it's
yes.
nice. But before we close, I want to mention one thing, is that my website is bettyekearse.com, but it's hard to spell. So if the the audience would type in the othermadisons.com, it'll point to bettyekearse.com. And I think the Other Madisons is much easier.
Thank
And
you for
I'd love
that.
for you to visit my website.
And I want to thank Betty, Besida, and Shelley for giving us such a wonderful program tonight. And thank you all for sticking in through this icy cold night. And thank you so much.
Appreciate it.